You're listening to The Back 40, the podcast for Ontario farmers, covering topics and issues that matter most to Ontario agriculture. Brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm the host of The Back 40, Mike Bryan, agribusiness specialist at Trillium Mutual Insurance. The topic of farm succession is one that a lot of farmers do not really want to face. Some put a plan together, but many just sort of hope that everything is going to go well, and they tend to avoid that topic as much as possible. Today, we're going to be talking with Maggie van Camp. Maggie is a farmer. She's the owner and CEO of RedCrest Farms, a farm that has 27,000 broilers and 80 acres of cropland. She is the former senior business editor with Country Guide. She's also the founder of Loft 32, and currently she is the National Agricultural Practice Development Leader for BDO Canada. Maggie, welcome to the Back 40.
Thanks, Mike. Happy to be here.
That title is quite a mouthful for your role at BDO. What exactly is it that you do?
I act as a National Director of Agriculture for the farm. It's in accounting for those of you who don't know. A lot of the work I do is industry relations, setting direction for agriculture. The general goal for BDO agriculture is to be integral to the success of our farm client. And so I try to ensure that happens. Generally, I just get to help organize internally as well. So it's a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. How does that relate to farm succession?
Oh, an accountant should be a trusted advisor as far as I'm concerned. I know mine certainly was. And we're trying to build out our team. Part of my mandate is to ensure that our team across from coast to coast has quality skills to deal with farmers around succession planning. So we even had Elaine Fraze, which some of you may be familiar with, the farm whisperer, we call her.
We've had her on the show here, and she's very much part of this whole farm succession planning and a great voice for that within the industry.
Oh, yeah. She worked with us for a year and a half training our accountants on how to have these conversations because it's very difficult and, how to put good questions forth so to help families figure out farm succession. So that was a really positive thing we've done. BDO has consulted with the federal government on changes to Bill C-208. Those amendments will make farm succession much easier as far as the tax planning part of it, Mike, and really proud of that we've been able to be a leader in that. More recently, we created with Farm Management Canada and now FCC, FTA Day, which is Farm Transition Appreciation Day. It's the second Tuesday in January. Basically, it's a day to really celebrate how good Canadian agriculture is at farm succession and celebrate the farm families that have been, transferring their businesses from generation to generation to generation.
It's something that we look out in the farming community here, and I see a lot of names that are the same as they were when my father started, and some of them the same as when my grandfather started as well. Typically, we have done a reasonably good job at transferring from one generation to another. As businesses get larger, though, it gets more difficult. There's more assets involved. There's more moving parts involved on today's farm. And you have a very personal story to tell about farm succession.
First of all, I'm a seventh generation farmer as well, Mike. So, I've seen this. In fact, when I graduated from the University of Guelph, I remember meeting with my dad, who was a dairy farmer. We sat down at the table. We looked like deer in headlights. Like we just had no idea on how to do this. This was 30 years ago. And I think the industry was like that. We really had no good way to transfer our farms. I mean, and today farms are way more complex. Think about the technologies we're using and what our farms look like and the types of produce we're doing and how many people are involved in the business structures. It's way more complex. Today, the average age of farmers is older and we're seeing multiple generations on a farm trying to communicate. Of course, the values are huge. I just looked up at the equity of Canadian farms at $560 billion worth of equity. And somehow we have to transfer that in the next 10 years. Currently, as of the last census, only 8.4% of farmers had a succession plan. So we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. And we need to get it done, not only to transfer the equity well, but also because it'll unhandcuff our industry. So basically, it's been holding back our industry because we haven't had any future plans to move ahead to. And I think that's a really integral part of succession planning. We did it with my dad. We tried it and it failed back in, I think, 1991. That failed. And that's fine. I mean, it wasn't a huge loss because we had careers. We still wanted to farm though. And eventually we got there on our own with a little help from my husband's family. Back in 2000, started farming. We started in the chicken business. And then a few years later, we were able to create a succession plan with his farm family so that we worked with a dairy and cropping operation, Mike, milked 125 cows, about 1,100 acres, and then the broilers as well. That was really important to us to be able to grow and think long-term with a written succession plan. That was important. My husband was killed in a farm accident on December the 16th, 2013. You know, that moment, everything was overwhelming. Everything we had worked for, sacrificed for, all of a sudden seemed overwhelming. I had 3 teenagers to look after myself. We had, 30,000 birds in the barn. We owned shares in his family's farm, a big old farmhouse at 100 acres. And, at that point, if we did not have a succession plan, I'm not sure how it would have gone. I mean, with the succession plan, we had a written pathway on how to proceed. And so that's what we did. We just followed the written pathway because we talked about the 4 Ds. That's death, disability, disagreement, and divorce, and what we were going to do. So that was built into our succession plan. We had wills, we had a shareholders agreement that was signed and read, and everyone had. If we did not have that, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to sort of navigate through those murky waters.
There's enough going on at a time like that from a personal standpoint that all of those details, as you say, it can become very overwhelming in a very short period of time if you don't have something in place, as you say, as a roadmap.
It basically gave me, all of us actually, because it was destroyed, not only myself, but his family as well. Like, it was just heart-wrenching. We had time and we had choices because we had done this ahead of time. Everybody knew what the pathway was, and that communication was clear up front. We also learned how to communicate in the process of succession planning. So, we sat down at a table and discussed the 4 Ds, which was very hard to do. In retrospect, thank God we did that. Thank God everyone knew what we were supposed to do. It was very helpful. I'm so glad we had that in place.
So as far as the succession plan goes, what did you find that you did really, really well with that plan that you had in place?
I think, as I said, we had the 4 Ds figured out. We all met with the same lawyer. We had the same lawyer. It was very clear what we were to do when. I think so that part was really good. And another thing that we did, and it was just because of my job with Country Guide at the time, I'd interviewed Jolene Brown. She's an Idaho farmer and a really dynamic speaker. And she talked about writing down a continuity plan for their farm. So she locked her husband in the pickup truck, which I did, and just asked questions. So what would you like? Where are the keys? What's the passwords? Who are our financial players? Where's the list of deeds? These kind of things that are very practical to continuity. Fortunately, with our farm, I did that with my husband, so that helped. I had kind of a list of his wishes, which was very helpful. But also on our farm, we were lucky because we had split management. So I managed the chickens. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law managed the dairy, and she did the books, and my husband did the cropping. I was lucky that we were able to I knew the feed dealer, so I knew who to talk to. I did chores the day he died because I just needed that continuity, consistency. So I say I raised salted chickens that crop because I cried every time I went to the barn, but it gave me that place to do it, Mike, and that consistency and control when everything seemed out of control.
So you carried on with the farm.
Yes.
Did you ever have a time when you thought that, you know what, I just can't do this anymore?
Every day. every day. It was our dream. Like, it wasn't just my husband's dream, this farm. So that helped a great deal. And that I worked in it every day. But I totally understand if a woman wants to sell the farm after her husband passes away. Oh my goodness. Yes. It's just tough if you're forced to sell. If you don't have any plans and you don't have things written down and you don't have, say, an insurance policy to help, or savings, or, any of those kind of backdrop positions, then it doesn't give you the choice to sell or not to sell. And I think that's when it's really, really difficult for farm families to navigate through.
So what did you find that you missed? What did you miss in your succession planning that you say, really wish I'd gone through and done that, and that we'd had that in place?
One thing we messed up with, I think, was I didn't write down where all our insurance policies were. You should just write down a list of, I had done them. It wasn't that I hadn't done, but it was just so foggy, I couldn't remember. There was one that we had written. It was a disability insurance policy. And I kind of forgot about it. And then I noticed on my Visa bill that there was, a debit with that on it. And I'm like, what is that for? So I started following through with the company. Didn't really get an answer. They said that, they would when they finally figured out what it was 6 calls later, they said, oh, well, we'll just reimburse you for the premiums you paid, which was great. I thought, yay. And then I bumped into the insurance agent who sold me that policy. He said he had usually put a rider on it of accidental death rider. And the insurance company did not tell me this when I called them. He followed up on it. And indeed, there was $100,000 accidental rider death on that insurance policy that I didn't know of. So I wish I had written out all the insurance policies we had more clearly.
Yeah, coming from an insurance background here, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't necessarily understand their policies as well as we would hope they would. And it's really important, if you don't know the answers, at least you know who to talk to and get the answers from. In this case, the agent that sold you the policy. Yeah,
that payout actually has put my kids through university. It's definitely been worth it.
That experience that you went through with this has given you quite the push to talk to people about farm succession. What sort of process should they go through in order to put a farm succession plan in place? How do they get started at this?
It can seem way overwhelming, Mike. Well, there's a lot of fear around it because, the death card is there, or terrible things. You're discussing the worst things that you can imagine in your life that will go wrong, right? So, of course, people want to avoid that.
Often at a time where we think we're invincible, right? Where we think that nothing can possibly go wrong and we're planning for the future.
Yeah, for sure. We're like farmers, this is a hope plan. It's not a succession plan. It's for the future. It's not for just you now and the present, but it's also for the future. And you have to be able to put it in your head like that. This is not about planning for things to go wrong. This is about planning for your business and your farm to continue through the generations in a way that will work best for your family too. That's a huge lift. I would suggest that anything is better than nothing, really. So start by having a will. People often put off having a will because they think, oh, well, we'll do it after we have a succession plan done. But get one, you just never know. Get one in place that will work for now. And it's not just for you, it's for the next generation as well. Make sure that they have a will in place. Even if they don't own any assets yet, they will. And then when they get into that place where they're invincible and, they're super busy and they have family and they forget to have a will, they'll have something in place. Way easier to do that.
So now we've got a will in place. Some people think that is much as we need to go. We don't need to go any further than that. We've already planned for everything by putting that will in place. But there's more to it than that, isn't there?
A will is not a succession plan. I want to be very clear that estate planning is part of succession planning, but it's not the full deal. There's a lot more involved, especially for agriculture. The tax planning that's involved is significant. There's a lot of opportunities to save on taxes if you do that and give with a warm hand versus a very cold one in estate planning. So getting it done sooner is much more important. You need a will, but that is not a succession plan. I would suggest that you start by reaching out to your accountant. but also you can start and do a lot of things at home that you don't know about. So one big piece of this is learning how to communicate with your family. And that's probably one of the hardest things to learn how to do. But you're better to do it before anything goes wrong than during in a state or, when everyone's really emotional. So I started having family business meetings with my kids once a year when my daughter was 14. We just met every year. I rent for $10, rent the library office, like the board office at our local library, and we sit down as a family. Each of them have chaired this meeting, and we have an agenda that I set the agenda ahead, but they have a chance to add to it, subtract to it, and one person chairs it. So learning how to do that and learning how to communicate about business with your family is a huge lift. So if you can do that, that's much better than trying to go from having, Christmas dinner with all your kids and then boom, start talking about business. If you can set up a way to have consistent conversations with your family, that's a huge, huge lift. The other part of that, Mike, I would say, is prepare yourself. When I said get a will, I also think that my generation, your generation, we need to really figure out what we want in our retirement and think about it. Don't push it off. Really embrace that in a positive way. It's one of the hardest things to do. I'm struggling with that right now. What do I want to do in my retirement? That's a big question, right? And many farmers just want to farm, die with your boots on. Well, if that's the case, you need to have a conversation with your spouse about that because maybe your spouse doesn't want to do that. I think in understanding that there's a dollar that's a real living budget, not what you can claim as deductions through your farm living budget, but an actual living budget is a good place to start. Another part of that is to set up a timeline. Talk about when you're 65, what's that going to look like? And what's your budget look like then? It goes then from wondering about it to thinking about retirement. And I think that's an important part of it.
It's interesting that you talk about when you talk about retirement and a lot of farmers wanting to die with their boots on. I find it very interesting that our median age of farmers in this country is 58, which is my age. And it's like, I can't imagine for myself, the idea of farming on into the future there, that's something from a physical standpoint that's not really part of my life anymore. And I'm to the point where I am thinking, okay, what do I want to do when I retire? I think a lot of farmers don't really have that conversation, don't even allow themselves to think that far ahead.
Well, it's because we do an all or nothing.
Yeah.
That's if you do an all or nothing scenario, then you're never going to get to a conclusion because there's no way you can be all or nothing in retirement, right? Your body won't allow you to. You could think you are. your risk tolerance goes down at 45. Humans' risk tolerance starts depleting. You may not know it, but you are actually approaching your business differently.
Do you like what you're hearing from the Back 40? We'd like to hear from you. Send us an email with your comments and thoughts to theback40@trilliummutual.com or follow us on social media @trilliummutual.
It's very important that you look to the next generation to sort of bring that, I like to say, bring piss and vinegar to a business. It's something called the succession effect. And you talk about the age of farmers. Well, the reality is that when we bring on a new generation, they bring energy, they bring ideas, they bring risk tolerance, they bring new technologies, they bring energy to a business that, at 58, I'm sorry, Mike, but we're not going to be able to do that, are we?
No, I agree with that. I think it's a very good observation. And for those of us in the farming community, all you have to do is look around at various operations. We can all do it. And we can look at the ones that have the next generation coming along, and then we can look at the ones that don't. And those farms are operated differently. There's a significant difference in how you approach that. And you can see it in the community.
And actually, one of the fears is that, the next generation is going to deplete my retirement. They're not going to make this profitable. You're worried about the risk for them taking on a really risky business, like that, those kind of conversations I often have with people. And I find it interesting because the research about succession shows that when you bring in a successor, your profitability increases. So it's really interesting. They just look at our unproductive assets differently. They're really sharp with the pencil. We're training the next generation of farmers to be much better business people, I think, than even some of us were. Like the next generation, it looks at problems very differently. And I think it'll handcuff our industry, which has been, you do the same thing as your father did because it was successful. So they look at problems in a much more broad way, and they're more future based. So it's exciting, I think, for the industry.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that it's not something that's always gone on, maybe not to the same extent that we see today, but I know that for my father and my parents, what they did when they were in the, up until that 45 to 50 range there was quite progressive for their time.
Yes.
And they did approach things differently than my grandparents did. It was a different operation. And now that we have a lot more assets involved and a lot more moving parts in the farm, it shouldn't be any surprise that the same thing would happen there, that that next generation has different ideas on how we should do things. Do you find that from farm succession planning standpoint, is there a difficulty with people of my generation letting go and letting those people start to reach in and make decisions on the farm?
I think it's too broad. It's a big spectrum of situations, right? Like every farm is different. That's one of the challenges to this is often, we do a prescript. Here's the tax plan. And actually, we haven't done any of the strategic thinking part of it, which should be done before you do a tax plan. That's been a problem. As far as the openness, many farmers our age, like in their 50s, don't want it to shake out like they did. Want their next generation to have choices, want them to have better education, want them to, succeed on a deep level and personal level. I think that that's interesting perspective. A friend of mine, who just did some succession planning, I was having a drink with him the other week, and Steve said, they just bought a farm. His son's taken over, and they just bought a farm. He goes, it's so great when the next generation takes on the debt, and I don't have to worry about it. It's really fun to buy farms then. And I'm like, yeah, because our horizon's different. At 58, your horizon to pay back is so much shorter than when you're 25, right? So
most definitely.
It's fun. If you can embrace it as, wow, what a wonderful place to be. It's a gift to have a successor, really.
Yeah, if we can let go of what we did when we were in our 30s and 40s and let the next generation take over that, it's not that we have to stop farming. It's that we get to enjoy it from a different perspective, that our roles change. I know there's no way that I could do the physical work I did at 30. Part of it because I haven't done it for a while, but also part of it because I'm simply older and things hurt more in the morning when I get up.
Isn't it fun to be able to build the people in your business? I mean, that is the ultimate joy for, being able to succeed anything, transition anything to the next gen, is to be able to build up the people that you love most. This is not just about your farm. This is really about building the next generation up and giving them an opportunity.
So what would you say is the most common mistake that people make when they're doing farm succession planning?
They skip ahead to tax. Almost invariably, they want to go ahead to tax. They don't want to talk about the strategy. They don't want to talk about family participation plans and sort of organizing who can be in it and who can't. They don't want to do sort of the top of the funnel. So I would describe succession planning as a big funnel. And at the top, that's where you meet as a family. That's when you learn how to communicate. That's when you set guidelines on who can participate. That's when you share information about how the farm operates financially. This is the big top of the funnel, and all the messy parts, really. And then eventually that funnel at the bottom is where you do the tax planning. That's where the shareholders agreement comes out. That's where you can talk about building then. So often, like one of my conundrums is that often people will do this big expansion. Dairy farmers are notorious for this. Their son or daughter goes off to ag college. They go, well, we got to build another barn because they're coming back, right? Without even talking to them, without even discussing. So, and then they, everyone gets in and excited. They build this barn and still no succession plan. And no idea how management is going to shift from the main father or mother to the next generation. No idea how that's going to happen. And yet everybody's been full on building this new barn, right? It's very common. And I think we need to sort of take a step back and sort of look at it. Let's do this strategically. Let's do growth strategically for succession. That would be my ultimate wish.
We spoke to our brothers, Dave and Doug Johnson, and they talked about the family meeting that, like what you talked about, how they get everybody together on a regular basis. And that's not just the kids that are thinking they're going to farm, but everybody to have those discussions as to what's going to happen, who wants to be part of the farm, who isn't going to be part of the farm, where are they going to go, and how are they going to plan for that. And that's that messy part of the funnel that you're talking about, that top part that we do have a tendency to try and skip over. And I'm bad that way. I always like to read the ending of the book first. And that's something you just can't do if you're going to be successful at this, is it?
Transparency is important. It's an important part of it, but you cannot, as a business, this is a business. Like, let's not kid ourselves. This is a business that this process needs to be done in a very strategic, sensible way that makes the business successful, right? We have to keep that going. Why bother do succession planning without a strong business, right? And a lot of people don't start with even knowing if their business is successful, or where they can improve, where they can't, and all that information. They get hijacked by, one person in the family talking about a random idea they have about the farm business, or, they get hijacked without this core business, keeping it all the process grounded.
So we've talked a little bit about that messy part of the funnel there, and we've talked about getting everybody at the table. But there's a difference when you get them at the table there. You talked about building the barn there without actually talking to the kids and finding out what's going to go on. What happens when you find that the kids you thought were going to come back to be part of the farm don't want to be, or maybe kids that you thought were interested in something else, going somewhere else, that they are going to come back again? How do you be fair to everybody when you're dealing with that?
First of all, equal is not fair, and fair is not equal. So let's be very clear about that. I don't think being equal should not be the goal of a farm succession plan. That is today very, very, very difficult to do. Maybe 30 years ago it was possible, but it's hard to do without using a lot of insurance, or, you can get fairly close. Mm-hmm. My friend Jim Snyder says this: fair is making sure everybody in the family is set up for success. And, that can be education, that can be, building lot for their house, that can be, maybe a trust for someone that's not capable of managing money, or it can, can have a lot of different solutions. But if you can keep that as your touchstone in all those conversations, so that everyone knows they're cared for, that everyone knows to keep the business going is really important, and the goal of the generation one. So that's got to be explained from their perspective. That's important. If you can do that with your family, then everyone's going to buy in.
We always like to use the word equal, and certainly I know going back in my generation, that was the big thing. How do we treat everybody equally and fairly, as if that the two of them were the same thing? But maybe the better term is equitable, which implies that not everybody's going to get the same thing, mm-hmm. but they're going to get something that they need for what they want to do in their life.
Yeah. And this is not about padding somebody's portfolio. Make sure, I think that has to be very clear up front. This is not what this is about. And the sooner you do this kind of planning, the better it is. Because if you are 80 years old and you're dealing with a 50-year-old Gen 2, that generation, and that's when you're having succession planning, that's going to be even more difficult. Their focus at that point is their portfolio. Mm-hmm. And rightly so, they need to plan for retirement. But if you can start this when your kids are 20 and start having these conversations, and so everyone understands, then not only do you capture the succession effect of the next gen and ownership in the next gen, but you also get to deal with family members who are, still open to ideas, still, understanding, still grasping what success is on a general level, not just a portfolio.
Yeah, and the sooner that you can get your kids involved in that conversation, the better. I mean, you're talking like mm-hmm. late teens, early 20s, when they're starting to make plans about what they want to do with their life. That's the time that you need to be talking about this. And you talk about trying to transition from an 80-year-old to a 50-year-old. Your 50-year-old is actually in the position where they want to be starting to transition, and in some cases they haven't even taken over the farm from a financial standpoint or a decision-making standpoint at that point in time.
And what a great opportunity, everyone in your family, to understand their personal budgets and their living budgets, get them to understand what a farm financial statement looks like, what a business financial statement should look like. What an opportunity to teach them these things, right? That the difference between being equitable and equal, those kind of discussions, what an opportunity to teach that to your children at 20.
It is. Now, you don't just work for BDO, you also have another project that you started fairly recently. You are one of the founders of Loft 32. What is Loft 32?
Like all good ideas, Mike, this one started in Vegas. Loft 32 did, yes.
I thought what's happened in Vegas, you left in Vegas.
Well, it was on the way home from Vegas, actually. A friend of mine, Crystal Mackay, and I were talking about the industry overall and sort of the gaps that we see. Because I don't think as an industry, we've done a very good job at succession, actually. I think that we've got this sort of gap in generations with 1974 graduates from the University of Guelph. And then there was this sort of time frame where the numbers dropped off significantly, right? So that knowledge, that skill set are all retiring at this point. And both of us were kind of talking about this and where we were going with it. And Chris and I are a little younger than that. And we went to Guelph together and we were like, well, what can we do to solve that? Loft 32 is the solution for that. It's basically stables of highly qualified people in agriculture that can act as mentors, that can share information, that can help communication, not only internally within our industry, but externally with other businesses and Canadians in general public.
How do you go about delivering on that? What sort of services do you offer and what sort of experts do you have in your group there?
So I just had to put up front that my role with Loft 32 is simply the fun role. I get to be the cheerleader in the back. I'm the director of fun officially, and Crystal is definitely CEO of that business. We have been able to do things like recently. One of the goals was to set up an online training service for agriculture, so sort of agriculture 101. For Canadian agriculture. And we recently did that with another partner of ours, Andrew Campbell and Sherilyn Nagel from Western Canada. And we set up this project called Utensil. And it's basically an online training program for agriculture to be used by companies for, say, onboarding or say used by food retailers. So they actually understand where their food is coming from. It's very useful. And I think it's one of those positive things that's going to be forever in our industry serving us. The other part of that is we have these we call them stables of people, and there are public speakers. I think the country's best public speakers, project managers. And so we've been able to work with many organizations like Canadian Cattlemen, Crystal's working with on a regular basis, developing strategic plans for companies, acting as a leader for Canadian agriculture and trying to fill that knowledge gap.
I've been very successful at reaching out during the pandemic, or has that been a challenge?
Well, the speaking part was a challenge.
I'm sure it was.
Yeah, because all the events were shut down. But the strategic part of it, and it gave us time to sort of create Utensil. So Utensil is done in short video snippets. So teaching through video is the newest way to teach that the next generation understands. It becomes a really engaging medium. So we were able to build out Utensil during this time frame. So in the long run, I think it's actually going to be really good for this business. I think it's going to be good for Canadian agriculture that the pandemic has sort of set our priorities back to being, we need our food. That's a really important part of it. We need local food, I think, too. And I think that's been good for Canadian agriculture overall.
I've said this before on the show that on Friday, March the 13th, we had a bit of a run on our grocery store and we went in on the Saturday, and first time in my lifetime I've ever seen empty shelves. And I think that certainly has raised the visibility of how important agriculture is to all of us. If a country like Canada can have empty shelves, it's certainly going to happen anywhere in the world.
Yes. I've been to Africa on a tour when I was a journalist still. That was shocking to see how much they appreciated their food. And it was top priority there because people starved. That was just the reality.
We spend very little of our disposable income to come up with something to eat. And in many parts of the world, that takes virtually everything that people have.
Yep.
And they still starve. Those are the places where we see starvation and food insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, that's a long way from succession planning, I think.
That is. That's a whole different topic that we could get into. So if you had to summarize, what is it that you would want to tell people about succession planning and in the farming industry and in the business industry or the business community in general?
I was thinking about this because I feel like it's very important to sort of have like your 80-20 rule, where you focus on that core 20% and make sure you cover that. And I feel like Canadian agriculture should do that during succession planning to keep some things in mind. First of all, build out your business structures, start with a will, look at a shareholders agreement, make sure you sign a shareholders agreement, but make sure it's built on your plan for growth and success so that it matches what your family needs, not just what the farm needs. Do that, build timelines and goals for management shiftovers. Understand that it's not just going to happen over tomorrow. It's going to be a long time and it's incremental. It's not all or nothing. It's just small steps toward this. And make sure they align between the generations, not just, dad saying this is when this is going to happen. It's got to align for both generations and create accountability to make sure that happens by writing it down. And the third thing was to build your people. If I could walk away from this world with one thing, it's that I've learned that you definitely need to build your people and not just your farm, not just your business. Build your people to drive your business and make sure you have fun doing it because life is way too short not to have fun.
I would agree entirely with that.
If anybody would like a tool that I created with a friend of mine, Angie Fox, it's called the Because I Love You list. And it is basically a list that people can fill out of important things for, it was for Angie's farm and my farm. When our husbands died, we wrote down what we needed to know. And you can find that at Loft 32's websites.
We've been talking with Maggie van Camp from BDO about farm succession planning and some of the things that you should look to when you're putting that in place. So if people want to get a hold of you and find out more about Loft 32, how do they go about doing that?
Start with our website. It's loft32.ca. You can contact us directly off that. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm Aggie the Maggie on Twitter. So please follow me on that and reach out anytime. You can also reach me directly through BDO. My email is mvancamp@bdo.ca.
Maggie, thanks very much for being part of the Back 40.
Thanks, Mike.
You've been listening to the Back 40. Join us next time when our guest will be Robin Anderson from the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association, brought to you by Trillium Mutual Insurance. Be sure to subscribe to the Back 40 wherever you find your favorite podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. The Back 40, bringing the ag community together one podcast at a time. I'm Mike Brine. Until next time, take care and stay safe.